Hello, everyone. I decided to talk about the University of Alabama and about the event specifically where it became desegregated in 1963. So, to give you a little bit of an idea of what the University of Alabama looks like today, here's just a snapshot of the fall 2017 enrollment. As you can see, although it's obviously a lot more diverse than it was back in the 60s, it's still primarily a white institution. White students account for 76.61 of the students at the university. So just a little bit of background, why the University of Alabama and why Alabama in particular when we start to talk about the civil rights. The author of The Schoolhouse Door, which was a book that I used for a lot of my research for this project, he says that Alabama was the civil rights movement was to the civil rights movement what Virginia was to the Civil War. A lot of really significant things about during the civil rights movement happened in Alabama. The Montgomery bus boycott in 1955, the Birmingham church bombing, which killed 4 young girls in 1963, which is also the same year that my event takes place, and then lunch counter sit-ins that started in the 60s as well as a lot of other events that aren't even listed here. The South, particularly Alabama, was a major place for a lot of these civil rights events. The reason I decided to do this project on this particular event at the University of Alabama is the first time that I had ever even heard of it was back in 1994 when I was just a kid. My favorite movie is, to this very day, Forrest Gump. It actually taught me a lot about history without really knowing it at the time, but it seems like every time I watch it, I learn something new. And Forrest Gump did depict this event, as Forrest Gump was a student at the University of Alabama when all of this was happening in 1963. So the key players in this would be George Wallace, he's the governor of Alabama. The two students, Vivian Malone and James Hood, were students that were trying to enroll in classes at the University of Alabama, and then John F. Kennedy, who was the president of the United States at the time. Governor Wallace was extremely pro segregation, very, very adamant about keeping blacks and whites separate. Just a little quote from him: segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. So this was a big, big platform of his. So the historical event happened on June 11th, 1963. It can be known in history as the stand at the schoolhouse door. So Governor of Alabama, George Wallace, he wanted to prevent African American students from enrolling at the University of Alabama. So in an attempt to do so, he barricaded himself at the front of the Foster Auditorium, which is like a multi-purpose building on the University of Alabama campus, when the students were attempting to go in, get their schedules finalized, and pay their fees. These two students, James Hood and Vivian Malone, really became celebrities. This whole event caused a lot of national attention because all they were trying to do was register for school, and Wallace was not having it. He was not stepping down, so that caused John F. Kennedy to issue an executive order, and the Alabama National Guard demanded that Wallace move away from the doorway, and then they were able to go in and get enrolled. And then a few years later, Vivian Malone was actually the first African American person to graduate from the University of Alabama. So the after effects, the executive order that JFK issued in order to make the National Guard go to the University of Alabama and essentially get Wallace to back down. That also helped allow black students to enroll at any other Alabama college or university where previously they had not been able to do so. So that was something that was helpful. Also, there was a National Guard presence still on the campus of the University of Alabama for a while, just because of the backlash of everything that happened. And the KKK was pretty prevalent on campus and in the area as well. So they helped keep the peace. So to compare a little bit of what was going on at that time to what Cohen and Kisker talked about, the 1960s was a big time for a lot of people to finally take note of all these social injustices that were happening and try to correct them. So that would definitely coincides with what they were saying um, about people getting more involved in social activism and the civil rights movement. Also, anti-discrimination laws happened became the laws in the workplace after John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Johnson became the president, and he established a lot of these anti-discrimination laws into becoming actual laws. And then the Civil Rights Act of 1964 happened the year after the stand at the schoolhouse door happened, and that made it so that African Americans were guaranteed the right to vote, and they wouldn't be denied that right because of the color of their skin. One book that I would recommend if you are planning on learning more about this historical event, I would strongly suggest The Schoolhouse Door, Segregation's Last Stand at the University of Alabama. The author is E. Culpeper Clark. It's listed in my reference list. I learned quite about it, a lot about the event. They really go into good detail about everything that was happening at that time. Um, Obviously, a lot of the events in Forrest Gump are not always historically accurate, but I'm appreciative that it's what got me interested in the civil rights movement to begin with, or a lot of the things that were happening in that movie and led me to find out the actual truth of what was happening, not just the Hollywood version. All right, so thank you so much. If you have any questions, just let me know.